What would you do if your family started treating you like you were losing your mind just because you're getting older? Would you fight their assumptions? Would you prove your competence? Would you let them discover the truth in the most shocking way possible? Well, when they found my secret bank account, they learned that the senile old woman they'd been patronizing was sharper than any of them had ever imagined. My name is Betty, and this is the story of how my family's assumptions about aging and mental capacity led them to treat me like an incompetent child, and how I used their own prejudices against them to teach them the most expensive lesson about respect they would ever receive. It started with small things, as these situations always do. A misplaced set of keys became Mom's memory problems. A moment of confusion about what day it was became signs of cognitive decline. A decision they disagreed with became evidence that she can't think clearly anymore. The pattern began about 8 months ago, when I was 74 years old and living independently in the same house where my late husband George and I had spent 37 years of marriage. George had passed away 3 years earlier, and I had been managing perfectly well on my own, paying my bills, maintaining my home, driving my car, and living the quiet, comfortable life of a woman who had earned her independence through decades of hard work and careful planning. But my son Michael and my daughter-in-law Linda had different ideas about what my life should look like at my age. The first incident that triggered their concern was laughably minor. I had gone grocery shopping on a Tuesday morning, as I did every week, and had forgotten to buy milk. When Michael stopped by that evening and opened my refrigerator looking for something to drink, he noticed the absence of milk and immediately jumped to conclusions. "Mom," he said, with that tone of exaggerated patience that adults use with small children, "didn't you go grocery shopping today?" "Yes, I did," I replied, wondering why this was worthy of discussion. "But there's no milk in the refrigerator. I forgot to buy milk. It happens sometimes." "But Mom, you always buy milk when you go grocery shopping. You've been buying the same groceries in the same order for decades. Forgetting something that basic, well, it's just not like you." Not like me, as if forgetting a single item on a grocery list was evidence of mental deterioration rather than the kind of minor oversight that happens to people of all ages when they're distracted or in a hurry. But Michael had seized on this forgotten milk as proof that something was wrong with my cognitive function, and he shared his concerns with Linda, who was all too eager to agree that I was showing signs of decline. The second incident was even more ridiculous. I had been balancing my checkbook on a Saturday afternoon when Michael and Linda arrived for an unexpected visit. They found me at my kitchen table with my bank statement spread out, trying to reconcile a discrepancy of $15 between my records and the bank's records. "Mom, what are you doing?" Linda asked, looking at my paperwork with the expression of someone who had discovered a child playing with matches. "I'm balancing my checkbook. There's a small discrepancy that I'm trying to figure out." "How small?" Michael asked. $15. The bank shows a different balance than my records show." Michael and Linda exchanged one of those meaningful looks that adults share when they think a child isn't paying attention. "Mom," Michael said gently, "maybe you should let us help you with your finances. Managing money can get complicated, and if you're having trouble keeping track of $15, I had been managing household finances for over 50 years. I had helped George build our nest egg, had managed our budget through lean years and prosperous years, had successfully navigated the financial challenges of raising 2 children on a single income. But because I was trying to reconcile a minor bank discrepancy, my son assumed I was no longer capable of basic financial management. But what they didn't know, what they were about to discover in the most shocking way possible, was that while they were questioning my ability to manage $15, I had been secretly managing assets worth over $2 million with the precision and skill of a professional investment advisor. The third incident was what convinced them that I needed supervision and support with my daily activities. I had been having trouble sleeping and had gotten up at 3 a.m. to make myself a cup of tea. While waiting for the water to boil, I had called my friend Margaret, forgetting that it was the middle of the night. Margaret, who was also a widow and also sometimes had trouble sleeping, answered the phone cheerfully, and we chatted for 20 minutes about her grandson's upcoming wedding. It was a perfectly normal conversation between two elderly friends who were both awake and bored in the middle of the night. But when Michael learned about the 3 a.m. phone call, he treated it like evidence that I was experiencing confusion about time and inappropriate social behavior. "Mom, you called Margaret at 3 o'clock in the morning," he said, as if I had committed a serious social transgression. I know what time it was, Michael. I couldn't sleep, and I thought Margaret might be awake too. She was, and we had a nice conversation. But Mom, normal people don't make social phone calls at 3 in the morning. Normal people. As if there were rules about when widowed seniors were allowed to call each other for companionship during sleepless nights. But the incident that pushed Michael and Linda from concern to intervention was the most ridiculous of all, and it involved my perfectly reasonable decision to redecorate my living room. Wait until you see how this simple home improvement project became evidence of my mental incompetence. The living room incident occurred on a Thursday morning in late September. I had been thinking for months about updating the decor in my main living space, which hadn't been changed since George's death 3 years earlier. The furniture was still arranged, the way he had preferred it. The walls still displayed the same family photos in the same locations, and the overall atmosphere was more like a shrine to our marriage than a comfortable living space for a woman starting a new chapter of her life. So I decided to make some changes. I rearranged the furniture to create better conversation areas and more natural lighting. I moved some of the family photos to different locations and stored others in my bedroom, where I could enjoy them privately. I bought some new throw pillows and a cheerful area rug that brightened the room considerably. The changes were modest, tasteful, and entirely appropriate for a woman who wanted her living space to reflect her current life, rather than her past. But when Michael and Linda saw the room, they reacted as if I had burned down the house. "Mom, what happened in here?" Linda asked, looking around the room with obvious distress. "I redecorated. I thought it was time for some changes." "But where are all the photos of Dad? Where's his reading chair? Why did you move everything around?" "I moved some photos to my bedroom, where I can see them more often. George's chair is still here, just in a different location, and I rearranged the furniture because I wanted better lighting for reading." Michael walked around the room like he was surveying damage from a natural disaster. "Mom, this doesn't look like you. This isn't how you've ever decorated. Are you sure you thought this through carefully?" "Thought this through carefully." As if rearranging furniture required the kind of deliberate planning normally reserved for major life decisions. "Michael, I'm 74 years old. I've been decorating homes and arranging furniture for over 50 years. I think I'm capable of deciding how I want my living room to look." But instead of respecting my autonomy and acknowledging my lifetime of experience with home management, Michael and Linda chose to interpret my redecorating as evidence that I was making impulsive decisions and showing poor judgment about my living environment. That's when they decided it was time for what they called a family meeting to discuss my situation. The meeting took place the following Sunday afternoon, in my newly redecorated living room. Present were Michael, Linda, my daughter Carol, and her husband Tom. Notably absent was any invitation for me to participate in planning this meeting or setting its agenda. They arranged themselves around my living room like a tribunal, with me sitting in my own chair in my own house, while my children discussed my life as if I weren't present. "We're all concerned about Mom," Michael began, taking the role of spokesman for the group. "She's been showing some signs that worry us." Signs that worry us. I was sitting right there, perfectly capable of speaking for myself. But they were discussing me in the third person as if I were either absent or incompetent to participate in conversations about my own life. "What kind of signs?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Memory problems," Linda said, "like forgetting to buy milk, or not being able to balance your checkbook properly. Confusion about appropriate behavior," Carol added. "Like calling people in the middle of the night." "And impulsive decision-making," Tom contributed. "Like completely changing your living room without thinking about whether it was a good idea." I listened to this litany of supposed evidence for my cognitive decline and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pure, crystalline anger. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, keeping my voice level despite the fury building in my chest. "You believe that forgetting one grocery item, trying to reconcile a $15 discrepancy in my bank statement, calling a friend during a sleepless night, and redecorating my own living room are signs that I'm losing my mental capacity." "Mom, we're not saying you're losing your mind," Michael said, though that was exactly what they were saying. "We're just saying that these little things might be early warning signs that you need more support and supervision." Support and supervision. Code words for taking away my independence and treating me like a child who couldn't be trusted to make her own decisions. "What kind of support and supervision are you thinking about?" "Well," Linda said, Maybe one of us could help you with grocery shopping to make sure you don't forget important items. And maybe we could help you manage your finances, Carol suggested, so you don't have to worry about balancing checkbooks or keeping track of small amounts. And maybe we could be more involved in major decisions, Tom added, like home decorating or other changes that might not be in your best interests. In other words, they wanted to take control of my shopping, my finances, and my personal choices about how to live in my own home. But what shocked me most wasn't their desire to control my life. It was their absolute certainty that they had the right to make these decisions for me based on the flimsiest possible evidence of cognitive problems. But they had no idea what they were about to discover about the mind they assumed was failing. Now here's where everything changed completely. I appreciate your concern, I said, though appreciation was the last thing I was feeling. But I'm not interested in giving up my independence based on your interpretation of perfectly normal incidents. Mom, we're just trying to help, Michael said. If you want to help, you can start by treating me with the respect due to an adult woman who has been managing her own life successfully for 7 decades. But Mom, Linda interjected, you have to admit that these memory lapses and judgment issues are concerning. At your age, these things can get worse very quickly. At your age. The phrase that reduces every elderly person to a stereotype, that assumes cognitive decline is inevitable, that justifies treating seniors like children who need constant supervision. Linda, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Do you genuinely believe that I'm mentally incompetent? She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with stating their assumptions so bluntly. I think you might be having some age-related cognitive changes that could affect your decision-making. And Carol? Do you believe I'm losing my mental capacity? I think you might benefit from some help with complex tasks, she said diplomatically. And Michael? Tom? Do you both agree that I'm showing signs of dementia or cognitive decline? They exchanged glances, clearly wishing I wasn't forcing them to articulate their assumptions so directly. We think you're having some minor problems that could get worse if they're not addressed, Michael finally said. So the answer is yes. You all believe that I'm mentally incompetent, or at least heading in that direction. We wouldn't put it that harshly, Carol said. But that's what you mean. You believe that I can't be trusted to buy groceries without supervision, manage my own finances, call friends when I choose to, or decorate my own home according to my own preferences. When you put it that way, it sounds unreasonable, Tom said. It is unreasonable. But since you're also concerned about my cognitive abilities, I'm going to propose a test. What kind of test? Linda asked suspiciously. A test of mental acuity, financial management skills, and decision-making capacity. If I pass this test to your satisfaction, you'll agree to stop treating me like an incompetent child and respect my autonomy as an adult. If I fail the test, I'll consider allowing you more involvement in my personal affairs. What would this test involve? Michael asked. Tomorrow morning, I want all of you to come back here. I'm going to show you something that will demonstrate exactly how sharp my mind really is and exactly how capable I am of managing complex tasks without your supervision. Mom, we don't need you to prove anything to us, Carol said, though it was clear that proving my competence was exactly what I needed to do. Actually, I do need to prove something to you. I need to prove that your assumptions about aging and mental capacity are wrong. I need to prove that I'm not the confused, declining elderly woman you've decided I am. And I need to prove that respect isn't something you give to seniors out of pity. It's something you give them because they've earned it through a lifetime of competent decision-making. And if we don't agree to this test, Linda asked, then you can continue believing whatever you want to believe about my mental state, but you'll do it without any cooperation from me. You'll have no access to information about my life, my finances, or my decisions. You'll be welcome to visit me as loving family members, but not as supervisors or caregivers or decision-makers. The silence that followed was the longest of my adult life. I could see them calculating, trying to decide whether to call my bluff or accept my challenge. What exactly are you planning to show us? Michael asked finally. Something that will demonstrate that while you've been worried about my ability to keep track of $15, I've been successfully managing something much more complex and much more valuable. How much more valuable? Carol asked. Come back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, and you'll find out. But you haven't seen the most shocking part yet, because what I was planning to show them would change everything they thought they knew about my financial situation and my mental capabilities. That evening, after my family had left with their confusion and their reluctant agreement to return the next morning, I spent several hours preparing for what I knew would be the most important presentation of my life. I gathered bank statements, investment reports, portfolio summaries, and tax documents from a file cabinet that my family had never seen, containing financial records for accounts they had never heard of. For the past 15 years, since George's death, I had been quietly building an investment portfolio that had grown from the modest life insurance payout and savings we'd accumulated during our marriage into a substantial fortune worth over $2 million. I had done this through careful research, strategic investing, and the kind of methodical financial planning that my children apparently believed I was no longer capable of managing. But more importantly, I had done this in complete secrecy, because I had wanted to maintain control over my own financial affairs, without interference from well-meaning children who might have opinions about how a widow should manage her money. Every month for 15 years, I had been making investment decisions, rebalancing portfolios, researching market trends, and managing assets with the precision and success that would have impressed professional financial advisors. While my children were worrying about my ability to remember to buy milk, I had been successfully navigating complex financial markets and generating returns that had far exceeded their own investment performance. But wait until you see their reaction when they discovered the truth. The next morning at exactly 10 o'clock, my family arrived with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to slightly patronizing. They clearly expected whatever I was planning to show them to be either embarrassingly simple or evidence of the cognitive problems they were convinced I was experiencing. I had set up my dining room table like a conference room, with chairs arranged around financial documents that were organized into neat stacks and labeled with sticky notes. On my laptop computer, yes, the 74-year-old woman they thought was losing her mind was quite comfortable with modern technology. I had pulled up online account statements and investment tracking spreadsheets that I had been maintaining for over a decade. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the chairs around the table. "What I'm about to show you will demonstrate exactly how capable I am of managing complex financial tasks." Michael picked up one of the documents from the table, a quarterly statement from my primary investment account. His eyes widened as he read the account balance. "Mom, this says you have over $400,000 in this one account."
That's correct.
"That's my conservative investment portfolio, focused primarily on dividend-paying stocks and municipal bonds." Linda grabbed another document, a statement from my growth investment account. "Betty, this account shows a balance of over $600,000. Also correct. That's my more aggressive growth portfolio, focused on technology stocks and emerging market funds." Carol was looking at a statement from my real estate investment trust account. "Mom, how many investment accounts do you have?" "7 different accounts, with 4 different investment firms, plus my primary savings and checking accounts at the local bank. In total, my liquid assets are currently valued at just over $2.2 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the living room. $2.2 million? Michael whispered, as if saying the number too loudly might make it disappear. $2,147.91 as of yesterday's closing market prices, to be exact. Tom was looking through a stack of tax returns, showing investment income that exceeded what most people earned from full-time employment. "Betty, how long have you been managing this kind of money?" "I started with George's life insurance payout, and our accumulated savings when he died 15 years ago. The initial investment was about $180,000. Everything beyond that represents growth from strategic investing over the past decade and a half." "But Mom," Carol said, clearly struggling to process this information, "we had no idea you had this kind of money. You live so modestly. You never mentioned any investments. You've never asked for financial advice." "I live modestly because I don't believe in wasteful spending. I never mentioned my investments because they're my private financial affairs. And I've never asked for financial advice because I've been successfully managing money longer than any of you have been alive." Linda was looking at a spreadsheet showing the performance of my various investments over the past 5 years. These are really impressive returns. Some of these investments have performed better than professionally managed funds. They've performed better than professionally managed funds because I don't have to pay management fees and because I have the time to do thorough research on individual companies and market sectors. Michael was shaking his head in amazement. "Mom, I can't believe you've been managing this kind of portfolio without any help." The research alone must take hours every week. It takes about 15 to 20 hours a week. I spend my mornings reading financial news, analyzing company reports, tracking market trends, and adjusting my holdings based on changing economic conditions. But yesterday you were having trouble balancing your checkbook for $15, Carol said. Yesterday I was trying to reconcile a discrepancy between my records and the bank's records. The discrepancy turned out to be a bank error. They had failed to record a deposit properly. I caught their mistake because I keep meticulous records of all my financial transactions. The family members looked around the table at each other, clearly trying to process the disconnect between their assumptions about my mental capacity and the evidence of sophisticated financial management that was spread out in front of them. "Mom," Michael said finally, "why didn't you tell us about this before?" "Because I didn't want your opinions, your advice, or your interference in my financial decisions. I wanted to maintain complete control over my own money without having to justify my choices to anyone else." "But we could have helped," Linda said. "Helped with what?" "I've averaged 8.3% annual returns over 15 years, which is higher than the S&P 500 index and higher than most actively managed mutual funds. What kind of help do you think I needed?" That was the moment when the full scope of their mistake became clear to all of them. They had been treating me like an incompetent child who needed supervision with basic tasks, while I had been successfully managing a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio with skill that surpassed professional financial advisors. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. "But you won't believe what I showed them next. Now that you understand the scope of my financial management capabilities," I continued, "let me explain something about the incidents that concerned you so much." I pulled out a notebook where I had been keeping detailed records of my investment research and decision-making process. The day I forgot to buy milk, I was distracted because I had been researching a potential investment in a pharmaceutical company that was developing a promising new treatment for Alzheimer's disease. While I was at the grocery store, I was mentally calculating the risk-reward ratio of adding that stock to my biotechnology holdings. Michael looked embarrassed. "We didn't know you were thinking about complex investment decisions." The $15 discrepancy in my checkbook, I discovered it because I reconcile all my accounts to the penny every month as part of my comprehensive financial management system. Most people wouldn't even notice a $15 bank error, but I caught it because I maintain the kind of detailed financial records that would impress a professional accountant. Carol was looking at my meticulously organized files with new respect. And the 3 a.m. phone call to Margaret? Margaret and I often call each other during sleepless nights to discuss investment strategies. She's also a successful individual investor, and we share research and market analysis. The night I called her, we spent 20 minutes discussing whether the Federal Reserve's interest rate policy was creating opportunities in the bond market. "And the living room redecorating?" Linda asked. "I rearranged the furniture to create a better workspace for my financial research. The new layout provides better lighting for reading annual reports and better organization for the computer equipment I use to track my investments." Every single incident they had interpreted as evidence of cognitive decline was actually evidence of sophisticated thinking and planning that was far more complex than anything they were managing in their own lives. Tom was looking through my investment research files with amazement. "Betty, this research is more thorough than what I see from professional financial advisors." "That's because professional financial advisors are managing hundreds of clients and don't have time to do in-depth research on individual investments. I have the luxury of focusing exclusively on my own portfolio and making decisions based on comprehensive analysis rather than general market trends." "But Mom," Michael said, "if you're such a successful investor, why have you been living so modestly? You could afford a much more expensive lifestyle." "I live modestly because I understand the difference between wealth and income, between assets and spending money, between building security and displaying prosperity. My goal has never been to impress people with expensive purchases. It's been to ensure my financial security and independence for the rest of my life." "And you've never wanted to share this success with family?" Carol asked. "I've shared it by ensuring that I will never be a financial burden on any of you, and by building an estate that will benefit your children and grandchildren long after I'm gone. But I've never felt the need to share day-to-day management decisions with people who might not understand my investment strategies or might try to influence my financial choices." Linda was looking at a summary of my charitable giving, another aspect of my financial life they had been unaware of. "You've donated over $200,000 to various charities in the past 5 years? I believe in giving back to the community, and my investment success has allowed me to be generous to causes I care about. But I prefer to make charitable donations quietly, without seeking recognition or involving family members in decisions about how to distribute my money. The education continued for another hour, as I walked them through my investment philosophy, my risk management strategies, my tax planning approaches, and my long-term financial goals. By the end of our conversation, they had a completely different understanding of my mental capabilities and my financial sophistication. But the most important part of the education was what they learned about assumptions, respect, and the difference between aging and incompetence. I want you to understand something crucial, I said as we concluded our meeting. Every assumption you made about my cognitive decline was based on ageist stereotypes rather than actual evidence of incompetence. You assumed that forgetting milk meant memory problems rather than distraction by complex thinking. You assumed that calling a friend at 3 a.m. meant confusion rather than purposeful late-night planning. You assumed that redecorating meant impulsive decision-making rather than thoughtful workspace optimization. We see that now, Michael admitted. We made assumptions based on your age rather than your actual behavior. More importantly, you assumed that you had the right to make decisions for me without consulting me, based on those false assumptions. You were planning to take away my independence based on evidence that actually demonstrated mental acuity rather than decline. We thought we were helping, Carol said. You thought you were helping, but what you were actually doing was infantilizing me. You were treating a competent adult like an incompetent child based on prejudices about aging rather than respect for my demonstrated abilities. The conversation that followed was the most honest discussion our family had ever had about aging, respect, autonomy, and the difference between genuine care and patronizing control. But wait until you see how this revelation changed our family dynamics forever. The weeks following my financial revelation brought changes to our family relationships that were more profound than I had expected. My children's entire perception of me shifted from viewing me as a declining elderly woman who needed supervision to recognizing me as a capable adult who deserved respect and autonomy. But the changes went deeper than just their attitudes toward my competence. The revelation of my financial success forced them to confront their own assumptions about aging, independence, and the rights of elderly family members. Michael was the first to acknowledge how wrong they had been. 3 days after our meeting, he called to apologize not just for doubting my capabilities, but for the patronizing way they had all been treating me. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize we weren't just wrong about your financial abilities. We were wrong about our right to make decisions for you in the first place. What do you mean? I mean that even if you had been having memory problems or cognitive difficulties, we still wouldn't have had the right to take over your life without your consent. We were acting like your age automatically transferred authority over your decisions to us. This was exactly the insight I had hoped he would reach. That respect for elderly people isn't conditional on their mental acuity, and that age alone doesn't justify treating someone like a child. Carol reached a similar understanding, but from a different angle. When she called to apologize, she focused on the financial implications of what I had accomplished. Mom, I've been looking at my own investment portfolio since our meeting, and I realize that you've been significantly more successful than I have with money management. I feel foolish for assuming that you needed help with finances when you've actually been outperforming all of us. It's not about who performs better, Carol. It's about respecting each other's right to make our own financial decisions, regardless of the outcomes. But it is about competence, isn't it? We assumed you were becoming incompetent based on minor incidents, when the evidence clearly showed that you were managing complex tasks more successfully than we were. Linda's apology was the most comprehensive, and also the most emotionally honest. Betty, I need to admit something that's difficult to acknowledge. Part of my concern about your cognitive decline wasn't really about your well-being. It was about my own anxiety about getting older. Seeing you make what I thought were mistakes made me worry about my own future mental capacity. And so you projected your fears onto me. I think so, yes. It was easier to focus on your supposed problems than to deal with my own fears about aging. But seeing how sharp and successful you actually are has helped me realize that getting older doesn't automatically mean becoming incompetent. Tom approached the situation from his perspective as an in-law who had gotten caught up in family assumptions without really knowing me well enough to make independent judgments. Betty, I owe you an apology for going along with concerns about your mental state without really knowing you well enough to have an opinion. I let other people's assumptions influence my judgment instead of forming my own assessment based on actual interactions with you. But the most significant change was in how our family began handling discussions about aging, independence, and decision-making authority. 6 months after the financial revelation, when my neighbor Mrs. Patterson began showing signs of actual dementia, our family's approach to the situation was completely different than it would have been before our education about ageism and assumptions. Instead of immediately discussing what decisions we should make for Mrs. Patterson, we started with questions about what support she might want, what services might help her maintain her independence longer, and how we could assist her in making her own choices about her care and living situation. "We learned from our mistakes with you," Michael explained. "We learned that our first response should be to ask how we can help someone maintain their autonomy, not how we can take control of their life." But the most meaningful change was in the ongoing relationship I developed with my grandchildren, who were fascinated by their grandmother's secret career as a successful investor. My 16-year-old grandson Jake began spending Saturday mornings with me, learning about financial markets and investment strategies. My 14-year-old granddaughter Emma started a small investment account with money from her part-time job, using principles I taught her about research and risk management. "Grandma," Emma said during one of our investment lessons, "I can't believe my parents thought you were losing your mind when you're actually smarter about money than any adult I know." Intelligence isn't about age, sweetheart. It's about curiosity, learning, and the willingness to challenge your own assumptions. Your parents made the mistake of assuming that getting older automatically means becoming less capable. Will you teach me how to avoid making that mistake when I'm older? The most important thing you can learn is to judge people based on their actual capabilities and behavior, not on their age or your assumptions about what people their age should be able to do. But the education extended beyond just my own family. Word of my investment success had spread through our social circle, and I found myself informally advising other seniors who were interested in learning about financial management. Margaret, my friend who had been my late-night investment discussion partner, started a small investment club for widows and retirees. We met monthly to share research, discuss market trends, and support each other in building financial security and independence. "Betty," Margaret said during one of our meetings, "I think what you did with your family, proving your competence so dramatically, has inspired all of us to be more confident about our own capabilities and more assertive about demanding respect from younger family members." The investment club became more than just a financial education group. It became a support network for elderly people who were fighting against ageist assumptions and demanding to be treated with the respect and autonomy they deserved. 1 year after the revelation that had changed my family's perception of me, I decided to take my financial education public. I started a blog called The Senile Investor, where I shared investment strategies, market analysis, and stories about ageism in financial services. The blog became popular, not just with other seniors, but with younger investors who appreciated the thorough research and clear analysis I provided. Several financial news websites began republishing my articles, and I was invited to speak at investment conferences about successful individual investing strategies. Mrs. Henderson, a reporter asked during one interview, "What do you think is the most important lesson people can learn from your story?" "The most important lesson is that competence isn't determined by age, and respect shouldn't be conditional on other people's assumptions about your capabilities. Every elderly person deserves to be judged based on their actual behavior and abilities, not on stereotypes about what people their age should be able to do." But the personal lesson that meant the most to me was what I learned about family relationships, honesty, and the importance of setting boundaries based on respect rather than affection. My relationship with my children became stronger after they learned to treat me as a competent adult rather than as a declining elderly woman who needed their supervision. But it took time for them to adjust to seeing me as someone who had capabilities they hadn't recognized and knowledge they didn't possess. "Mom," Michael said during a family dinner 6 months after our financial revelation, "I want you to know that this experience taught me something important about parenting my own children."
What did you learn?
"I learned that love doesn't give you the right to make decisions for other people, and concern doesn't justify taking away someone's autonomy. When my kids get older, I want to remember to respect their independence even when I'm worried about their choices." And that, my dear listeners, is how being called senile by my own family led to the most empowering and educational experience of my later years. The $2.2 million investment portfolio that I revealed to prove my mental competence became the foundation for teaching my family about respect, autonomy, and the difference between genuine care and patronizing control. But more importantly, It became the catalyst for changing how our entire family approaches aging, independence, and the rights of elderly people to make their own decisions about their lives. The word senile, that had started this entire conflict, became a badge of honor when I chose it as the name for my investment blog. Every time someone reads The Senile Investor, they're reminded that assumptions about aging and mental capacity are often wrong, and that respect should be based on demonstrated competence rather than chronological age. If my story teaches you anything, I hope it's this: never let other people's assumptions about your age determine your own sense of capability and worth. Never accept being treated like a child simply because you're getting older. And never underestimate the power of proving your competence in the most dramatic and undeniable way possible. The family that called me senile learned that the mind they thought was failing had actually been working more effectively than their own minds all along. They learned that age is not a measure of competence, that respect should be earned through demonstrated ability rather than given or withheld based on birth dates, and that love without respect is just another form of control. But most importantly, they learned that assumptions about elderly people are often completely wrong, and that the cost of those assumptions can be the destruction of relationships, the loss of trust, and the painful discovery that you've been underestimating someone who deserved your admiration rather than your pity. The 2020 $47,891 in my investment accounts wasn't just proof of my financial acumen, it was proof that intelligence, competence, and capability don't diminish automatically with age. It was proof that elderly people often have knowledge, skills, and experiences that younger family members don't recognize or appreciate. And it was proof that the most expensive lesson families can learn is that respect should never be conditional on other people's assumptions about what you should or shouldn't be capable of doing. 3 years later, my investment portfolio has grown to over $2.8 million. My blog has thousands of subscribers. My investment club has expanded to include seniors from 3 different cities. My grandchildren are successfully managing their own investment accounts using strategies I taught them. But the most valuable thing I've gained isn't financial success, it's the respect of my family, earned not through age or relationship, but through demonstrated competence and the courage to demand the treatment I deserved. My children no longer whisper about my memory or my judgment. They no longer assume they know what's best for me better than I know myself. They no longer treat me like a declining elderly woman who needs supervision and management. Instead, they treat me like what I actually am, a competent, intelligent, successful adult who happens to be 77 years old and who has earned the right to make her own decisions about her own life. And when other families in our community start making assumptions about elderly relatives based on minor incidents or age-related stereotypes, my children are the first to suggest that maybe those families should look more closely at what their elderly relatives are actually capable of before deciding they need supervision or care. Remember what we learned about Mom? Michael tells friends who are worried about their aging parents. Remember that what looks like decline might actually be distraction by complex thinking. Remember that what seems like confusion might actually be competence in areas you don't understand. The word senile, that had once been used to dismiss and diminish me, became the foundation for education, empowerment, and a completely new understanding of what aging can look like when it's supported by respect rather than undermined by assumptions. I have more stories about aging with dignity, demanding respect, proving competence, and the surprising ways that families can learn to see elderly relatives as resources rather than burdens. So pull up a chair, challenge your own assumptions about aging, and remember to subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because the most important lessons often come from the most unexpected sources, and wisdom doesn't have an expiration date. The senile old woman my family worried about turned out to be the most successful investor any of us had ever known. And that, my dear listeners, is a lesson about assumptions that no amount of money could ever buy.